To our Mason City Council study session for the morning of Thursday, March the 18th of 2021. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on proposed text amendments, including, well, I'll spare you the chapters, but they're relating to recreational marijuana establishments. Mr. Pai, I believe, Mr. Brady, looks like Nana's got the hot seat for the morning, is that right?
Yeah, we want you to spend some quality time with Nana today, so we've got both items are his.
Okay.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. We do have a presentation for you this morning to discuss the marijuana establishments and requirements in the city of Mesa. As you are aware, the voters passed Proposition 207 in November last year. And those that changes actually require some changes to our zoning ordinance. In addition, the council did pass the police ordinance in December, and this is a follow-up to that ordinance to make or recommend certain changes to our zoning ordinance to comply with the state regulations. So with me this morning is Rachel, and we also do have staff from the city attorney's office that will be helping us with the presentation. So I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. So as Nana was introducing, this presentation is regarding some proposed amendments that we are working on for addressing the recreational marijuana that was passed by voters this last November. And then in December of 2020, as you know, we passed an ordinance for our police ordinance that limited recreational marijuana establishments to dual licensee facilities. With that, there were a couple other regulations that were included, such as prohibiting the delivery of recreational marijuana, prohibiting marijuana testing facilities, the consumption of marijuana on city properties, and the consumption of marijuana while driving or operating a vehicle. As far as our current zoning regulations as they pertain to medical marijuana, these regulations regulate medical marijuana dispensaries, cultivation, and infusion facilities. They are only permitted in the light industrial and general industrial zoning districts. They have permissible hours of 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And they have size limits for the different facilities. So dispensaries are limited to 2,500 square feet, with no more of that being 500 square feet used for storage. And with this as well, there are several different kind of categories of separation requirements as they pertain to different uses. So some of those are a 500-foot separation from daycare, preschools, public parks, and HOA-owned open space. And then 1,200 feet from churches, libraries, schools, and public parks. There's also a more stringent separation for 2,400 feet from residential substance abuse facilities, alcohol rehab facilities, correctional transitional housing, and off-site medical marijuana cultivation facilities. And lastly, the separation requirement between dispensaries itself is 5,280 feet, so 1 mile in between individual medical marijuana dispensaries. So on the screen before you is a map of where all the currently registered marijuana facilities are located. So we have within the city right now, we have 14 dispensaries, but we also have three cultivation facilities and one facility that is both cultivation and infusion only. So these do not dispense marijuana to the public, but they are used for the cultivation and infusion of those products. So as staff, what we are recommending for changes to the zoning ordinance is to keep in line with what was passed with the police ordinance to only allowing the dual licensees facilities. So up on the screen here, I have what we are proposing for a definition of what a dual licensee facility is. And the important thing is that the recreational sale of marijuana must be in conjunction with medical marijuana sales, regardless of the license they held with the state. We're recommending that the zoning remain the same so that they'd only be allowed in LI and GI districts, that the permissible hours of operation remain the same from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., and that the size limits remain the same. So for dispensaries, that would be 2,500 square feet. For cultivation facilities, that's 25,000 square feet. And for infusion facilities, it is 10,000 square feet. And then we are not recommending any changes to the separation requirements as well. So those separation requirements would be the same. So our next steps anticipated, we are working on drafting up the ordinance right now, and we are anticipating going to planning and zoning in April or May, and then coming back to city council before you all go on break for the summer. With that, I'd like to open it up for any questions or discussions.
Thank you. We're going to begin with Councilmember Spilsbury and then Mr. Luna.
Do we know how many applications have been put in for Mesa with the new law?
Councilmember Spilsbury, we have not received any new applications for facilities. We know that many of the existing dispensaries are, have applied to become a dual licensee facility, but we haven't received any new applications.
Mr. Luna.
Has there been any interest from community members wanting to separate the notion of having both a medical dispensary and one that's recreational use? Has your office, have you heard of any requests for two separate entities?
Mayor, Councilmember Luna, I've been fielding a lot of the inquiries about the recreational marijuana, and I have not had any interest or any discussions with the public about the desire to have the two separate facilities. Most of the correspondence I've been having is with the current operators and their desire for larger square footage for the dispensaries and for different hours of operation.
Rachel, do we know how many of the current medical facilities have recreational?
I do not know,
Okay.
because they aren't required to tell me.
Yeah,
at
we
this
don't,
point.
yeah, so I think the answer is we haven't received applications for a new facility, medical or recreational, but we don't know how many of the current medical have become dual purpose, is that right?
That's
okay.
correct.
But can we find that out?
Yes.
Yeah, so we could, I guess the question, council, mayor and council, if you'd like, maybe by the end of the today, we could find out how many of the current medical dispensaries have also received the recreational, if that's the question.
Yes, that would be, yeah, that's a good, thank you for clarifying that, Chrissy. Yeah, because I was wondering if there was interest outside having something separate from medical facilities. So thank you.
Chris, on that point, would it be safe to assume that all or most of them have, because this is a lucrative business, and the businesses that operate the medical are also in the business of selling recreational?
Mayor, based on the lines that are going out the door at those locations, I would think so, but we'll confirm that.
Thank you. Mr. Heredia.
On the square footage, is that the combined square footage for both the medical or recreational dispensary, that the 2,500 square feet? And then second, you had a slide that said 2,500. Did it say 500 included the storage within that 2,500, or is it an additional 500 for storage?
Mayor, Councilmember Heredia, so that is correct. So the gross floor area for the dispensary is 2,500 square feet. And of that, only 500 square feet can be used for the storage of products. So the total allowable area for the dispensary is 2,500 square feet.
Okay. And then another question is, I guess my first question answers this question, but just to clarify, if it's a current medical marijuana and they want to build out a recreational, it would be the same, right? The 2,500 square feet that they have to match in total.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions as well. Now, I recall back in December when we made the decision that we made, it was partly because we felt like Mesa already had, compared to our neighbors, a lot of marijuana retailers, medical marijuana retailers. You just told us we had 14 currently and we were looking at the number in our surrounding communities, and we thought that even if we did as we're talking about now, just kept marijuana retailers to dual licenses, that we would still have relatively more than our neighbors. Has that proven to be the case? Have our neighbors taken a similar approach, or are we proportionately more or less marijuana retailers in Mesa as opposed to the surrounding communities?
Mayor, Council, we do, comparing the number that we have with the surrounding communities, we seem to have a lot. And so it's not out of place. The number we have, we believe is adequate for the city. And also, if you look at the map, it's spread out. So it doesn't really take long if a person wants to get access to any of them to drive to that location.
Anna, could you question quickly, maybe Mayor and Council, if you don't mind, let's spend a little time on this map because Nana, why don't you explain the gray areas, or Rachel, so the council can understand, because the mayor is not only concerned about the current number that are existing, but what about the possibility of someone coming in and asking for another site? What is this, how does this map help us inform us about that possibility?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Chris. You're anticipating my next question, which is if we stick with the current rules, my understanding is that the only place that they could, well, that there's really very few opportunities for additional licenses. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, Mayor, Council, let me kind of walk you through this map a little bit to provide some explanation. So the markers that you see on the screen that are kind of a series of green colors, those are the markers for the dispensaries or the cultivation or infusion facilities. The gray areas that you see around them, the circles, those are the separation requirements that I spoke of earlier. So they're different distances depending on uses. So it could be 500 feet, it could be the mile between dispensaries. But that's what the gray areas are. Those are the buffers, but for which, you know, another dispensary could not be located. The light blue and the darker blue areas signify the LI and the GI zoning districts, which are the only zoning districts that dispensaries and marijuana cultivation and infusion facilities are allowed to locate within. So what the open blue that you see on the screen would be the available locations where any new facility might be located.
So, Mayor, you can tell from that light blue, and I'm trying to do this without having really the benefit of what's underneath, but in Southeast Mesa, you see a larger blue area. We think most of that is encompassed with, well, it should be, because it's light industrial, is Gateway Airport. I think that's correct.
That's correct, yeah.
And then I'm not sure about north of the blues to the north, but that looks, I'm not sure what that is. Can you know what that is?
Yeah, some of that blue that you see around the Greenfield Higley area, that would be your Falcon Field area,
Oh,
once again. So airport, and then south, east along Germain and Pecos there, we have CMC Steel. I couldn't think of the first few letters.
Right.
CMC Steel and some other large industrial users that are already located there. So there really is a limited amount of land that any new facility might be able to locate in the city.
Okay, so unless fly-in marijuana distributors become a thing, we're probably limited in the potential for additional licenses. And so I think a build out, which it looks like we're pretty close to, if we keep these limitations in place, we'll have 14, maybe, you know, the one or two more, 15, 16 for the foreseeable future. And again, I guess my question goes back to that still makes us relatively robust in terms of the number of retailers compared to our neighbors. Is that correct?
Mayor, I would say that is correct. We do have more dispensaries than other jurisdictions surrounding us.
Great, thank you. Next question I have is really kind of a procedural one. I noticed that what we're talking about here is text amendments to an ordinance. So we're not, today this is agendized for us just to provide direction, give you our feedback. Then now you're going to go to planning and zoning. And then I think ultimately will come back to us after that process. And do we end up voting on text amendments to ordinances, or is that something that's done administratively?
Mayor, that is correct. So right now we are working on those text amendments. So today we're seeking direction from council, and we will be going to planning and zoning once we have a final draft of that ordinance, and then coming back to council for the adoption of that ordinance.
For a vote, yeah.
Mayor, Council, that's correct. We also will be going to the Planning and Zoning Board to have a study session to receive feedback from them before we present the final ordinance to them for recommendation to you.
Okay, so ultimately, we will be adopting a new or amended ordinance. Is that, I guess I'm just wanting to know what text amendments are. At this point, is that just staff recommendations that are going to be considered by planning and zoning and then come back to us for the adoption of a new or an amended ordinance?
Mayor, Council, that is correct. So what will be coming to you is amendment to the current requirements that we have, which will be amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow recreational only as a dual license, and also to keep this time, the operational time, and also basically to keep the size to 2,500. So those are the specific. What is really changing is the definition of dual license to allow recreational to be allowed within those existing medical marijuana facilities.
Okay, thank you. Council, any other questions or comments on this agenda item? All right, I think the consensus, Mr. Brady and Nana, is to proceed with putting this through planning and zoning and staff review, and then we'll look forward to getting your recommendations later.
Mayor, Council, that is absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next agenda item. Nana, I don't think you're, no rest for the weary. I'm afraid you're up next as well. Is that right, Mr. Brady?
Correct.
Mayor, Council, the next item for discussion is community residence. This is an item that we've been discussing with the City Council, the Planning and Zoning Board, and the residents of Mesa for quite some time now. And we've spent several months or years actually working on this project. Back in about 3-4 years ago, the council directed staff to look into ways of streamlining and strengthening our review process for community residents, which used to be called group home. And also the state did make certain changes to their requirements, which also triggered the need for us to look at our standard, our current requirements to make changes as well. So we are going to go through our current requirements and the proposed changes that we are proposing before you. And with me again is Rachel, and I do have Charlotte here also from the City Attorney's Office to help us with this presentation.
Okay, so Mayor, Council, first off, we would like to cover kind of the purpose and the goals of this project. So as Nana was describing, one of the goals here is to strengthen our current registration process for group home, for the handicapped, or what will be now called community residences. And with this, we are taking the opportunity to review our current requirements to make sure that they are in compliance with state and federal law. But kind of to the larger intent of this is we want to make sure that we're providing residents with disabilities an opportunity to live in a family-like setting, that they're able to integrate with surrounding communities.
No, that's okay.
But also we want to make sure that we're preventing the overconcentration of facilities that may result in a de facto social service district.
And Mayor and Council, if I could jump in just for a minute and just really emphasize the importance of these purposes and goals as opposed to any inappropriate purpose or goals. And I say this because this is going to come before the P&Z board, and this area of law under the Fair Housing Act, under the ADA, prohibits discrimination against certain protected classes, which include the disabled. And it's well established that people that are recovering from alcohol and drug addiction are disabled under the Fair Housing Act and the ADA. And while some people want to dispute that, it's not disputable under the law. And so we need to be very thoughtful in how we provide comments regarding this in the future at the P&Z board and the community. Because there's a number of cases where well-intentioned legislation by cities gets actually overturned or they get sued because members of the community actually come and speak, and they speak out against it in a way in which they're trying to clearly just simply preclude, prevent, and eliminate group homes for the handicapped from their community. And ultimately, the courts look at that, even though it's not even statements from the council, but rather from the community, and overturn the legislation. In part because also their lawyers didn't make a statement, like a statement right now, saying that we're not going to consider those kind of statements that made. People might make those statements, and we don't cut people off, but they're not a factor in this decision. We've hired a consultant to look at this. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discriminatory actions that affect the availability of these group homes, which includes legislation enacted with the purpose of eliminating or preventing group homes. The purpose of this ordinance that we're going to discuss today is not to do that, and that's not the intent. And rather, it is appropriately seeks to protect the residents of these group homes from unscrupulous operators by providing protections for their health and safety, by including such things as annual registrations that will require them to be either licensed by the state or to obtain certification from a nationally recognized organization or similar organization. We will also seek to prevent clustering or overconcentration of these group homes that may result in a de facto social service district. And so those really are the intent of what we're talking about. And as this progresses forward to P&Z, I would just ask that the community be thoughtful because the courts not only look at the statements, some of the courts have drilled down all the way to emails to council members. And so I would just ask that people be thoughtful. And many people were last time we brought this up. People did talk about poorly run group homes and that they've observed from firsthand observation and that some group homes put profit over their patient and that they weren't providing any services and they were just simply becoming a house for people that were utilizing drugs and that they wanted to see better services to those people. And they were providing it not based off of speculation or secondhand account stories. Rather, they were the neighbors that were right next door and they saw it. And so I'm not trying to dissuade people from providing statements that are trying to encourage the city to further improve the quality of these homes for the residents. And that's what you'll see is the intent of this ordinance, and we think it will be effective. We've looked at other communities within the state that have done something similar, and they have been effective, including Prescott. That was a long sidetrack. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, so then moving on, we wanted to provide a little bit of background about what group home for the handicapped is and what it is not. So when we talk about group home for the handicapped, this is really for handicapped or disabled people living together. And the intent is that they're living as a single housekeeping unit, so acting like in a family-like environment where they have staff people on site to provide care, training, and support. Sometimes this term gets confused with other uses within our zoning ordinance, such as social service facilities, nursing and convalescent homes, assisted living, or correctional transitional housing. So when we speak of group home for the handicapped or community residents, as we'll be describing later on, it does not include these other uses that are not specific for disabled individuals. So our current requirements can really be broken up into 3 categories. So group home for the handicaps with less than 5 residents are currently not required to register with the city, and they are not subject to any separation requirements. So in essence, they are treated like any other family or single residence in the city. They're allowed to locate wherever they would like. Community residents with 5 to 10 residents, at that point, they're required to register with the city. And at that point, they are subject to certain separation requirements. So one of those is that they be 1,200 feet from another group home for the handicapped. And then when we passed the assisted living ordinance this last December, we had added in that they also must be 1,200 feet from an assisted living facility. These are permitted in several zoning districts, all of the residential zoning districts, as well as some of the downtown residential and downtown business districts. When we get to the larger facilities with more than 10 residents, once again, they're still required to register with the city. They are still subject to the separation requirements I described before, But in this case, they're also required to obtain a special use permit. And in this case, they're only allowed in certain zoning districts. So these are more tailored to multiple residents, commercial zoning districts, and some downtown districts. So a little bit more stringent on the larger group homes. But with our proposed changes, what we want to do is we want to strengthen our current registration process. So as part of that, we'd be requiring an annual renewal and also providing a revocation process. With these amendments, we are defining a family and updating other definitions within the zoning ordinance. We're updating our development standards, and we are strengthening the reasonable accommodation process. So with the definitions, there are going to be several changes. So we are removing several terms that are either outdated or they were closely resembled one another. And so we're kind of streamlining some of those uses. We're replacing those definitions with new ones such as community residence. And then we're adding new definitions, as I mentioned, the definition of a family, a single housekeeping unit, and a group foster home. And then we will also be modifying some of our existing definitions, such as boarding house and social service facility, to provide some better clarification and alignment with these other definitions. So one of the biggest changes is this introduction of a definition of a family. And just briefly, what that encompasses is that we are proposing that that be no more than 4 unrelated individuals. And then the other large change is removing that definition of group home for the handicapped and replacing it with this term community residence. And that is just more in line with state and other requirements. So this definition is it's 5 to 10 unrelated individuals with disabilities. But within that, we're going to be making a distinction between a family community residence and a transitional community residence. The family community residence is really meant for the long-term living arrangements of those facilities. So that would generally be a year or more, so a long-term living arrangement. While transitional community residences would be more of a limited tenancy, less than a year, could be on a month-to-month basis. And with this, we're able to have more specific requirements for land use process for each of these. So while the family community residence may be permitted in right in some of the residential districts, the transitional community residence might have a more robust review process requiring a special use permit. Then for the development standards, the changes that we are proposing are a lot of changes to the registration process. So we're strengthening this process. We're going to be requiring the annual renewal that we did not have before, and also providing a process for revoking a registration for a home. With the new definition that we are proposing, the occupancy limit and the benchmark of when a home needs to register with the city is going to be reduced from 6 to 10 residents to 5 to 10 residents. So now you would have to register if you have 5 to 10 residents, as opposed to before it was required for 6 to 10. And then lastly, for separation requirements, we have added in additionally that they must be 1,200 feet from a correctional transitional housing facility, in addition to the existing separation requirements from other community residences or assisted living facilities. With the reasonable accommodation, we are formalizing and strengthening this process. So with reasonable accommodation, they may request that to the spacing requirements, occupancy limits, or the licensing requirements. With this, they would be required to obtain a special use permit. And for each one of these different reasonable accommodations, there would be specific approval criteria to look at for each one of those scenarios. So our next step coming up is, once again, we are anticipating going to Planning and Zoning Board on April 14th for a study session, and then returning to them on April 28th with our final recommendation and get their recommendation to City Council. And then we are hoping to return to you before council break. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'm sure we've got several. But do you mind, I might just kick it off. Mr. Smith, maybe you can answer this for me. It seems like, I mean, this has obviously been an issue that cities in the statewide have been very concerned about for several years. And we've been talking about it for several years. And my recollection is that it was at maybe 1 or 2 legislative sessions ago, the state adopted some legislation that would allow cities to maybe be more involved in regulation. And we were just saying we were waiting for the state to come out with the details of, or for the state agencies to write the regs that would then tell us how we can regulate. Has that now happened, and is that why we are doing this, having this meeting today?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, a couple years ago, an issue was sober living facilities, and the city passed an ordinance on sober living facilities. And when we were doing it, the state was looking at legislation on sober living facilities. They ultimately did pass that legislation on structured sober living facilities. And that sort of preempted the field and took over the field of that area as far as the licensing. It regulates structured sober living facilities, which in many ways is supervised sober living facilities. And, unfortunately, some operators are circumventing that legislation. And it's resulted in actually almost an incentive to provide less services and less structure so that you don't have to get the license. And, hopefully the state will come in with legislation and fix that statute. That would be nice, but they haven't so far. And so we've looking at how to improve the quality of the care at these residents, because unfortunately, in some ways, that piece of state legislation almost creates an incentive not to provide services or supervision so that you don't have to get a license.
Okay, so is there a distinction between sober living facilities and group homes? Are they not the same thing?
So one is sort of a subset of the other, right? So group homes, which now we're calling community residence, is a bigger definition, and within that definition, sort of a smaller subset would be a sober living facilities. Community residence includes a much larger many other types of what we would traditionally call as group homes.
Mayor.
So are the changes we're talking about today, do they apply to sober living facilities?
Answer.
Mayor, Councilmember, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear your last question. I apologize.
Sure. Hi, Charlotte. I'm just trying to catch up to the discussions we had a year or two ago, and where we were waiting for the state to give us some regs. And Jim helped me understand that had to do with sober living facilities. So I'm just trying to understand, are the rules that we're talking about today, do they apply to all group homes, including sober living facilities, or are there different rules for those types of homes?
Mayor, council members, one of the changes that we are proposing with the ordinance is for those sober living homes that are not considered structured, that under the current, that aren't currently required to be licensed by the state because they're not offering the services that would be required for a structured sober living home. What we are recommending is that they would have to, because they're not required to be licensed, those unstructured sober living homes, they would be required to get certification from the Arizona Recovery Housing Association or show that they're an Oxford House charter. And then for those facilities, so most other group home facilities do have some type of a licensing provision at the state level. For some of facilities that might not be required to be licensed by the state, we would, they would have to go through a reasonable accommodation process to show that they are operating similar to licensed facilities. So that's another addition that we're adding to the ordinance for the benefit of those residents in those homes to make sure they're getting the care that they need.
Okay, so I like the rules that we're talking about, but it seems like, let's say there's a facility that opens up in a neighborhood, and we think maybe these are the rules that apply, and that they're going to need, they're going to need annually to register with the city, and the part of that registration will require us, we'll say, will show us your state licenses. There's a possibility that they'll say, oh, we don't need any state licenses because we're an unstructured sober living facility. Is that correct?
Correct. So for those facilities that don't think that they need to be licensed by the state, and the state has said that they don't need to be licensed, then they would, to operate in the city of Mesa, they would need to provide a certification from the Arizona Recovery Housing Association, or show that they're a charter, that they have a charter house certification, and that's a type of sober living facility, the ones that first started back in 1975, and so they have a reputation of having a high quality of service. So if they can provide that they have an Oxford House charter, that would be another way that they could meet those licensing requirements that we're going to require in the new ordinance, the changes that we're making.
Okay, thank you. Council, other questions on this topic? Councilmember Spilsbury.
With the registration process and the annual renewal, which I think is a great idea, are we doing that in January? Are we doing it in July? And are we doing it for every existing business as well? For every existing residence as well?
Mayor, Councilmember Spilsbury, we are planning on requiring the registration to occur 6 months after the council passed the ordinance. And then the question about the existing facilities, what we've done so far, we've sent letters to all the existing facilities to get a response from them for us to determine those that are in operation and those that are, have closed. And those that are existing, they will all be required the same time to also register. So we will have a set date where we will have all those facilities registered as of that date, and then a year from that date, we will require them to come in and renew them, so we will have all the database.
Will you actively be going to look for ones that aren't registering or in compliance with this, or are you just hoping everyone will?
Mayor, Councilmember Shrewsbury, I hope, well, it's so an administrative process that we are going through to see those that have not responded. Maybe it's because the addresses of the owners have changed or they may not have received. So we will be working with our code enforcement group as well to really track down all those facilities and be able to have the right information.
So, Mayor, Councilman Spilsbury, the great question. The enforcement side of planning and zoning is our Department of Code Compliance. So by, first of all, going through the process of notifying those that we believe are out there or we've had some record out there, we'll go through that process and make sure they're responding to us and they've gone through the process. On an annual basis, we'll continue to notify them that they need to renew and provide the information. Most likely, we're not physically going to be doing an annual inspection or going to those locations. However, if we do receive complaints, then that will allow our staff will then respond and be able to do a more detailed, in-depth inquiry as to the operations of those facilities.
Also, Mayor and Council, if I could just add that if they meet the definition of family under the code, that then they wouldn't go through the registration process, which is also just how it works. You know, you don't go through the registration process if you meet the definition of family. So you're talking about the 5 through 10.
Thank you. Mr. Heredia and then Mr. Freeman.
Going on the line of, is there like a formal process for folks to issue a complaint or information on if they see if they have information within their neighborhood? I know we all get some of these complaints within our offices, but is there a formalized process set up for this?
So, Mayor, Councilman Reddy, it would be like any code compliance complaint that we receive. So yes, the code compliance has a call-in number. There's email that can come into code compliance. They receive those complaints, and then they will follow up with the inquiry, and they will contact the group home or the community residence, as it's known now. And so that happens today, and that will continue going forward. Frankly, what this ordinance, I think, will do will give them actually a much clearer direction of the questions they can ask and better understanding, what is required of these community residents when they go out there on the complaint. So we think that will be effective. That's how we typically respond to a lot of the planning or the zoning statutes, is through complaint basis is how we will respond.
Okay. And then my other question, now Rachel, is there for these licenses, if it's 5 to 10, is there a certain square footage requirement for these homes that we're looking at, or is just a normal home that could, if you're able to have 5 to 10 people in that home, is there anything that spells out any square footage requirement to having the amount of people in a home?
Mayor, Councilmember Heredia, we as a city do not have those space requirements, but my understanding from talking to some of the people in the industry is ADHS actually do have a requirement. They determine the space areas, so that's determined by the ADHS. That's a state.
So, Mayor and Council, I'll speak. So, the state licensing and some of the national certifications have embedded into them sometimes those type of requirements, and obviously many other type of requirements regarding sort of the quality of care. And that's the intent of us, is sort of basically incorporating or explicitly incorporating a requirement that you either have the state license or a national certification. Now all types of sort of quality of care now effectively get embedded into our code, so that we are trying to ensure that we have quality operators and that the residents of these facilities are getting quality care. And so some of those, and I'd have to look at, I don't know which ones sometimes do have sort of minimum spacing requirements. But we'd have to look at each one. But it's much more than that too, realize. And so that's the benefit of incorporating in the license or certification requirement.
Okay. Yeah, I think based on the quality of care, it's one thing to have 5 people, and then another thing to have 10 people right at the max. And so that's what my only concern is, the quality of care of, going with a 5 or a 10. Not sure if there's a scale up to that 10 as far as the space requirements that the state has.
Councilmember Heredia, this is Charlotte in the City Attorney's Office. I do know that structured sober living homes under the state licensing requirements, they do have, if it's one person, I believe in a bedroom, it's 50 square feet, and if there's 2, I think it's, there's requirements, I think it's 60 square feet per occupant. So there is some restrictions, I know, in the state licensing for the amount of size and the number of occupants if it's a structured sober living home. And I believe there's similar requirements if they're unstructured, that I believe the ASRA, the Arizona Recovery Housing Association, may have similar type of requirements.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Freeman, and then Vice Mayor Duff.
Thank you, Mayor. Gosh, I just applaud staff for getting this off the shelf and moving forward. I mean, this is really great. And I know I've had a lot of issues in my district about this whole conversation. So some of the questions I have is, you brought up SUP versus a council use permit. And what is the advantage? I think it should be explained for us. And then I get a lot of calls about any type of home. And I guess where I'm struggling at is, what is the definition of a family? Is it 3 or 4? And how do you pick up operators, that are unrelated individuals, or 4 or more? And that's kind of where I'm leaning, is I'd like to see the ordinance go down to 4 or more. And I know Jim's kind of going, no, Mark, I wish you hadn't have said that. But, we have a lot of I have a neighborhood that has 4 homes within the 1,200-foot district or separation requirement, and they're probably at 4 or more, and they could be less. But how do we, you know, and the report says that we shouldn't inundate neighborhoods with transition homes of any type so that they can, you know, blend in the neighborhoods and become normal people. But yet I have an overconcentration in some areas, and they're grandfathered. I get that. But I think for discussion for us is, what's the definition of family? Are we comfortable with 5 unrelated individuals or more, or should it be brought down to 4? And I like the 4 number. I think Nana and I discussed that the national average of a family is, Nana, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. Was it 3.6 or 3.8?
3.8.
Okay. Well, with that, I mean, yeah, we could round it up to 4 as a family, but still, I think that we have to have some control of the smaller operators. I hate to use that word, control, but registration. Let's use the word registration requirements for the smaller operators, so that they are getting good care, giving good care to their people who they're taking care of. So with that, Mayor, I'll just end with that note. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, Nana, we are going to 4. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, yes, it is. And I think it is, we are going to go to 4 unrelated individuals for the definition of family. Maybe Councilmember Freeman intended to say 3, I'm not sure. But yeah, we're going to 4. That is a very common number within, 4 or 5 is the most 2 common numbers within the state. You will see occasionally, we're aware of one city in the state that has 3, but we've been told by that city that they don't enforce that number. It becomes difficult to enforce a number, especially because realize this applies to also when you have college students renting out a house. This applies to not just sober living homes, it applies to all types of community residents or group homes, our old definition. And so many communities have found 4 or 5 to be sort of the, you know, sort of the appropriate number. I think Phoenix is 5. I think Chandler is 5. Prescott is 4, and we're recommending to go to 4 as appropriate. There was 2 questions too. There was also sort of the council use permit versus the special use permit. And that comes into the context of the difference between the definition of family community residents and transitional community residents, that there would be either a special use permit or a council use permit with the transitional community residents. And the thought is that, and the staff recommendation is to use a special use permit so that it goes to the Board of Adjustment. It's sort of an objective type of criteria that you apply, similar to what other things that the Board of Adjustment does. It's a quasi-judicial board, and so it seems to be an appropriate place for it to go as far as making those determinations. I'll still say the transitional community residents, they'll still have to meet the separation requirement. They'll still have to get the annual registration, which means then that they're either licensed by the state or they have a certification from a nationally recognized organization. So they'll have all those also.
Thank you, Jim. You did help me with, I did meant to say 3, but I get it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Duff.
Yes, thank you. Will there be an annual registration fee, or is it just registration that we're asking?
Mayor, Council, we're still looking at the cost that it will incur as to process those annual registration, and we'll make a recommendation if that is going to come with some cost of service as well.
Okay. And also, is there going to be a public database on this, or this is just internal to us in the city so that we know where they're located, and if a resident inquires about something going on, we just turn it over to code, or can we see if it actually is a community residence?
So that's a great question, Vice Mayor. And so the state recognized sort of the sensitivity of the location of some of these houses when they passed the legislation on structured sober living. And I don't remember the exact specific phrase that they used, but they made, I believe, both the address and the specific location as that it's not a public record. And so when you ask for them, you end up getting sort of dots on a map, sort of generic locations, and you'll see, in fact, that's what if we ever pull a map right now, that's what we provide. And so we think that sort of concept would probably apply also to the larger concept of community residence.
Great, thank you. That's all I had.
Council, any additional questions on this topic? So, Nana, it appears this is similar to the agenda item we discussed earlier. You need just some direction from us to proceed, and then this will go to planning and zoning, and then ultimately come back to us for a new ordinance. Is that correct?
Mayor, Council, that is correct. And I just want to get a confirmation that the recommendation is to define family as 4 or less unrelated people, and also for reasonable accommodation for it to go through the SUP process. And then if somebody is doing a facility that is 5 to 10, that's community residents will be allowed in the zoning district that we showed you. So those are the major changes, well, those are the changes that we'll be bringing forward to you.
Thank you. I think I'll address those. I think 4 is the right number. I think that makes us among the more restrictive communities in the state. The fact that Tempe has 3, but acknowledges, yeah, we don't even pretend to enforce that because we know that likely won't pass legal scrutiny. I think that's a good indication that 4 is the right number, and we're with Prescott, who is inundated with these types of facilities and is very trying to be as aggressive as they can be in the way that they're regulated. So, and I agree that the special use permit through the Board of Adjustment is the correct route to go. It depoliticizes it, and it's in a quasi-judicial atmosphere, which I think is the correct way to respond to these questions. So. Council, any additional comments or any other direction you'd like to provide? All right, go ahead, Mr. Freeman. Yes.
I just have the concern, how do we pick up smaller operators, 4 or more? I just think that, I guess I just don't know, again, how prevalent they are, but there are a number in my district because we'll get calls on them. So I know that confuses Nana a little bit there by me saying that, but I guess I'm comfortable with the current suggestion on the ordinance, and then if we have to tweak it down the road, I suppose we can. But yeah, thanks.
I appreciate you expressing those concerns, and I get it as well. I guess to staff's point, if you get 4 unrelated individuals that are renting a home because they're college students and they're trying to share living expenses, do we really want to regulate that situation? So at some point it gets, you just got to draw a line and say we're going to regulate this and not that.
I suppose just to answer that question, it depends on what type of, what they're calling themselves, the operator, and some may try to disguise themselves as this to get through the licensing process, but yet they're operating this other direction. And that's what I've experienced in my district. So, yeah. And we have code compliance on it today, but thank you.
Thank you. And I know that this is the most important issue in the city for many neighborhoods. So I understand, we certainly understand why all of our council is very engaged and concerned about this. And hopefully we now have better tools to help our neighborhoods. So Nana and Mr. Brady, I think you have the consensus is to proceed with the ordinance as you've drafted it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is item 1C. That's an appointment to the Historic Preservation Board. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mr. Freeman and Vice Mayor Duff. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Freeman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Spilsbury.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Heredia.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Duff.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Luna.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. That passes unanimously. Next item on our agenda is the current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. Council, I know you've been busy. Who would like to share with us? Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Mayor. I had the opportunity to go visit NAMO Defense System, NAMO Defense System. Some great opportunities, some great things happening over there. They're planning to expand, and they currently have a new operator, a new CEO, I guess. So I had an opportunity to visit a facility and see what their expansion is going to be looking like. And so I'm excited to announce that. I'm planning to have a meeting with our economic development director to take him over there just so that he can see what they're planning to do. And then we'll come up with some additional talking points relative to what that expansion looks like. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you. Council, anything else you'd like to share with us? Vice Mayor Duff.
Yes, I had an interview the other day with ABC News 15 and about the downtown reemergence and how many of our businesses in downtown have benefited by the CARES program and provided the resilience that we needed to make it through this rough time in the pandemic. Kay Chevrolet and 12 West were featured, and also looking forward to what we can do to continue our assistance to small businesses from the American Rescue Plan. On that same day, I had an interview with an ASU student with Councilmember Spilsbury for Women's History Month and Women Who Are Leading. And it was an inspiring interview. And thank you very much, Julie, for joining in me. That was wonderful. And this Friday, I'll be at the Mesa Convention Center with Mesa Rotary, distributing food for the United Food Bank. So if you make it out there, just shout out and say hi. I'll be there from 7:30 to 11:30 this Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, other questions? Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, I just want to give a shout out to our spring training games. Several of us have been there, and people are enjoying our ball teams as they play in our community, and we welcome our visitors. And it's been a fun time seeing people come and support their respective teams. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
I hardly ever chime in anymore, but this week I had an interview by the ASU student about economic development in and around Gateway Airport. Also had an interview yesterday with the East Valley Tribune about economic development along the Elliott Road corridor, as well as what we're seeing along Ray Road, and welcoming a Electromechanica to Mesa. Very exciting. They're going to be down on Ray Road here in District 6. And then I had an interview, a video interview with Community Leaders of America Monday morning, and so I'll be posting that up pretty soon. But it was a lot of fun. I got to brag a lot about Mesa, and to the folks outside of Arizona that don't know anything about Mesa. So it was a fun opportunity.
Thank you. Your comments reminded me that an issue that I've been dealing with at a national level over the last few days is the surge at the border with border crossings and the unaccompanied minors and asylum seekers, and just the unprecedented numbers we're seeing again, the most in a couple of decades. So that puts pressure on communities like Mesa, because the federal government asks for help from our nonprofits and from our faith groups to help with facilitating, that number of people. And so the last time this happened a few years ago, that really put a lot of financial strain on our faith-based organizations and on our NDOs. And so I've been expressing concern to Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas and many people in his administration that on behalf of our city and the very compassionate groups in our city that are being called upon by the federal government to help respond to this, that they need the resources to do that. So yesterday I was on a meeting with Mayor Gallego of Phoenix and the Secretary's top people, and I just want you to know that that's an issue that the city is very engaged in, trying to get the resources we need to help our nonprofits that are that are being asked by the federal government to play a role. So stay tuned, but certainly getting right now all the right answers, and hopefully we'll get the resources that we need to respond to that. Council, anything else you'd like to share with us? If not, the next item on our agenda is to hear about our future meetings. Mr. Brady.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Our next meeting will be a week from today, our next study session on the 25th. So we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That completes our agenda. Council, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Mr. Luna, seconded by Ms. Spilsbury. We'll do a voice vote. Please unmute your microphones. All in favor of adjournment, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned.